The only gift I received on my 18th birthday was 3 trash bags thrown onto the freezing Chicago lawn. My dad stood in the doorway, waving a crumpled DNA test and screaming that he was done raising another man's kid. He and his wife smirked, thinking they had discarded a burden. They had no idea they just evicted the legal owner of this house and an 8-figure fortune. Here is exactly how I made them pay. My name is Joy Everline, and for as long as I can remember, I have been a ghost haunting my own life. The house we lived in was a perfectly respectable 2-story colonial in a middle-class suburb of Chicago. To the neighbors, we were the picture of the American dream. There was Robert, my father, a man who wore his mediocrity like a suit of armor. There was Brenda, his second wife, whose smile never quite reached her eyes unless she was looking at a price tag. And then there was Kyle, her 19-year-old son, a boy who had failed upward his entire life and was currently taking a gap year that seemed destined to last a decade. And then there was me. Technically, I was part of the family. Biologically, I was Robert's daughter, but in practice, I was something between a live-in maid and an unwanted tenant. I learned very early on that love in this house was a currency, and I was perpetually bankrupt. The winter in Chicago that year was brutal. The wind off the lake felt like it was trying to strip the skin from your bones, but it was still warmer than the atmosphere inside our kitchen. I remember the Tuesday before my birthday clearly. I was on my knees scrubbing the grout between the tiles because Brenda had decided they looked dingy. Kyle was sitting at the island counter 3 feet away, eating a sandwich I had made, dropping crumbs onto the floor I had just cleaned. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look down. He just kicked his foot out slightly, forcing me to scrub around his designer sneakers. Those sneakers cost $300. I knew because I had seen the credit card bill on the counter. My father had paid for them without blinking. Meanwhile, I was wearing a sweater I had bought from a Goodwill bin for $4, and my winter boots were held together with duct tape and hope. "You missed a spot." "Joy," Kyle mumbled, his mouth full of bread and roast beef. I didn't look up. I just moved the brush to where he pointed and scrubbed harder. Silence was my armor. If I didn't speak, I didn't give them ammunition. The dynamic had been this way since Brenda moved in 10 years ago. Slowly, incrementally, I had been pushed to the margins. First, I lost my bedroom so Kyle could have the larger space for his gaming setup. I was moved to the small guest room, and then eventually, when Brenda decided she needed a sewing room she never used, I was moved to the finished attic. It was cold in the winter and stifling in the summer, but I preferred it. It was the only place in the house where I didn't have to feel their eyes on me. As my 18th birthday approached, the air in the house shifted. Usually, my birthday was treated with aggressive indifference, a generic card, maybe a $20 bill if Robert was feeling guilty, and then life would move on. But this year was different. There was a vibrating tension, a sense of anticipation that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Robert and Brenda were whispering. They would stop talking the moment I entered a room. They exchanged looks across the dinner table, smirks that suggested they knew a punchline to a joke I hadn't heard yet. It wasn't the excitement of planning a surprise party. I knew what a surprise party felt like, or at least, I knew what it looked like in movies. This felt more like an ambush. 3 days before the big day. I came home early from school. The house was quiet, which was rare. I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water and heard Brenda's voice drifting from the living room. She was on the phone, her voice pitched in that gossipy, conspiratorial tone she used with her friends. I froze. I knew I should keep walking, but survival instinct told me to listen. "No, we have everything ready," Brenda was saying. She let out a sharp, cruel laugh. I know. God, it has been a long time coming. Robert is finally ready to pull the trigger. We just have to wait until midnight on the 24th. Once the clock strikes 12, she is 18. The state of Illinois doesn't require us to pay a dime after that. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained stone still. "Exactly," she continued. "We pack her bags, put them out, and change the locks. Kyle gets the attic for his studio. It is going to be so nice to finally have our house back. No more baggage. She called me baggage, not a daughter, not a stepdaughter, baggage. I quietly set my glass down and backed out of the kitchen. I crept up the stairs to my attic room, closing the door softly behind me. A normal teenager might have cried. A normal daughter might have felt her world shattering. But I had grieved the loss of my father years ago, back when he started looking at me not with love, but with a mixture of annoyance and regret. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a cold clarity wash over me. If they were planning a war, they had severely underestimated their opponent. I sat down at my desk, a wobbly card table I had salvaged from the garage, and pulled my laptop out from its hiding spot under the loose floorboard beneath my bed. It was a high-end machine, a beast of a computer that looked like a brick, but ran faster than anything you could buy at a generic electronics store. I logged in. The screen glowed with lines of code, a comforting waterfall of green and white syntax. To my family, I was Joy, the disappointment. I was the girl who worked a dead-end part-time job answering phones at a company called Stratosphere Dynamics. They thought I made minimum wage. They thought I spent my money on nothing because I never bought new clothes. They assumed I was saving up for community college, which they had already told me they wouldn't pay for. They were wrong. Stratosphere Dynamics was real. But I wasn't a receptionist. I was a ghost developer. It started when I was 15. I had always been good with numbers, patterns, and logic. While other kids were scrolling through social media, I was teaching myself Python and C++ on library computers. I became obsessed with market fluctuations. I noticed that the stock market wasn't just chaos. It was a language, if you could speak it. You could predict it. I wrote an algorithm. It was clumsy at first. A small bot designed to scrape news headlines and predict microtrends in tech stocks. I tested it with paper trading. Fake money. In 6 months, I had turned a theoretical $10,000 into $300,000. That was when I got noticed. Not by the public, but by a recruiter on a dark web forum for developers. Stratosphere Dynamics was a boutique quantitative hedge fund. They didn't care that I was 15. They didn't care that I was a girl. They only cared that my code was faster and smarter than the 40-year-old men sitting in their Wall Street offices. I signed a contract as an independent contractor under a limited liability company I formed online. My age was hidden behind layers of digital anonymity and a very expensive lawyer I had hired with my first payout. Now, 3 years later, my minimum wage job was actually a retainer that paid me more in a month than Robert made in a year. But the real wealth wasn't the salary. It was the equity. I had taken my pay and fed it back into my own algorithm. I reached under my mattress and pulled out a heavy fireproof pouch. Inside was a single, encrypted USB drive and a thick file of documents. I opened the file. It contained the deed to a penthouse apartment in downtown Chicago. Purchased through a shell company 6 months ago. It contained bank statements from the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. It contained a printout of my diversified portfolio, cryptocurrency bought before the boom, blue-chip stocks, and conservative bonds. I looked at the number at the bottom of the most recent balance sheet. It was a number with 8 digits. Brenda thought she was kicking a homeless girl out onto the street. She had no idea she was evicting a multimillionaire. I put the documents back. I wasn't ready to leave yet. I needed them to make the first move. I needed them to show their true faces so that when I crushed them, I wouldn't feel a shred of guilt. The next 2 days were an exercise in acting. I scrubbed the floors. I ate the leftovers. I listened to Kyle brag about how he was going to turn the attic into a man cave with a recording booth, as if I wasn't sitting right there. I watched Robert avoid my gaze, his eyes sliding off me like I was made of Teflon. Then came the night of my 18th birthday. I had worked a late shift at the library, my cover story for when I needed to attend virtual board meetings or code sprints. It was pouring rain when I walked home. The Chicago sky was a bruised purple, and the rain was freezing, turning to slush the moment it hit the pavement. I walked up the driveway. The lights in the house were on, blazing with a warmth that I knew didn't extend to me. I opened the front door. "I am home," I called out, my voice steady. Silence. No one answered. The television wasn't on. There was no sound of Brenda cooking. No sound of Kyle shouting at his video games. The house was submerged in a heavy, suffocating silence. I walked toward the stairs, intending to go to my room and change out of my wet clothes. But as I passed the living room, I stopped. Robert was sitting there. He was sitting in his favorite armchair. The leather one he never let anyone else touch. He wasn't reading the paper. He wasn't watching the news. He was just sitting there, staring at the empty fireplace. On the coffee table in front of him, there was no birthday cake. There were no presents wrapped in bright paper. There was only a single, thick manila envelope. I looked at him, for the first time in years. He looked at me directly, but there was no warmth in his eyes. There was no fatherly affection. His expression was a mixture of disgust and a strange, twisted triumph. It was the look a man gives a problem he has finally solved. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of a soldier hearing the first shot of a battle. I slowly turned my head to look up the stairs. My suitcases were there. 2 of them, my old, battered suitcases that I used for school trips. They were packed, but packed was too generous a word. Clothes were sticking out of the zippers. A sleeve of my coat was caught in the handle. They hadn't been packed. They had been stuffed. My room had been raided. I could see the violation from here. They had gone through my drawers. They had touched my things. I looked back at Robert. "What is this?" I asked, my voice calm. Robert stood up. He picked up the envelope from the table. He held it like a weapon. "Happy birthday. Joy," he said. The words tasted like poison in the air. The silence that followed was louder than the storm outside. It was the sound of a bridge burning, the sound of a family finally admitting that they were never a family at all. He stared at me, and in his eyes, I saw the truth. He didn't just want me gone. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to break me. I tightened my grip on my wet backpack, feeling the hard outline of the encrypted USB drive against my spine. "Go ahead," I said softly. "Say it." The manila envelope struck my chest with a dull thud before sliding down to the floor. It landed between my wet boots, stark and threatening against the hardwood I had spent hours polishing just 2 days prior. Robert did not wait for me to pick it up. He was vibrating with a rage that seemed to have been fermenting in his gut for 2 decades, a toxic brew that was finally boiling over. "Pick it up," he spat, his face flushing a deep, ugly crimson. "Read it. Read exactly what I have been paying for all these years." I bent down slowly, keeping my movements deliberate. My hands did not shake. I tore the seal on the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, heavy stock, bearing the logo of a laboratory I recognized immediately. It was a budget lab, the kind you find advertised on late-night television or the back of tabloid magazines, the kind that gave you the result you paid for. My eyes scanned the document. It was a paternity test. The formatting was amateurish, the font slightly misaligned, but the numbers in the center were bold and unmistakable. Under the column for paternity probability, it read 0%. I looked up at the man I had called Dad for 18 years. He was smiling now, a rictus of cruel satisfaction. "I am not raising another man's kid," Robert declared, his voice rising to a shout that shook the framed photos on the wall. Photos that, I noted, only featured Kyle. 18 years, Joy, I gave you 18 years of my life. That is enough charity for one lifetime. I am done playing the martyr." Brenda stepped out from the kitchen shadows then, swirling a glass of Chardonnay. She looked like a cat that had finally cornered a mouse she had been toying with for a decade. She walked over to Robert and placed a possessive hand on his shoulder, her eyes gleaming with malice. "We told you," she purred, looking at me with undisguised disgust. "I told Robert years ago that you didn't look anything like him. You have those strange eyes, that dark hair. You are a mongrel. Joy. And this house? This house is for family. Real family." She took a sip of her wine, savoring the moment. "This house is for Kyle. It is his inheritance. We are not going to let a piece of trash like you steal a single penny of his future. I looked from Robert to Brenda. The air in the room was thick with their venom. They expected me to scream. They expected me to fall to my knees and beg. They wanted the satisfaction of seeing me break, of seeing the arrogance of the charity case shatter into a million pieces. I disappointed them. I folded the paper neatly and slid it into the pocket of my damp jeans. I did not shed a tear. I did not frown. I merely looked at Robert with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a tumor that needed to be excised. You are basing this decision on a piece of paper that looks like it was printed at a public library, I said, my voice steady and low. But let us assume, for the sake of this conversation, that you believe it. You are evicting me, tonight, in a storm. I am not evicting you, Robert sneered, stepping closer, invading my personal space with the smell of stale beer and self-righteousness. I am correcting a mistake. An eviction implies you had a right to be here in the first place. You are a squatter. Joy, you have been squatting in my life since the day you were born. And the law? I asked. The law says you are an adult as of midnight, Brenda interjected sharply. We checked. We called the police station non-emergency line just to be sure. At 18, our legal obligation ends. You are on your own. Sweetheart. I looked at Robert one last time. I needed to be sure. I needed him to seal his fate with absolute clarity so that later, when the gavel came down, he could never claim it was a misunderstanding. Robert, I said, using his first name for the first time in my life. He flinched at the sound of it. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Think carefully. Once I walk out that door, there is no turning back. Whatever relationship we had, whatever safety net you think you have, it will be gone. Forever. Robert threw his head back and laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. Safety net? He mocked, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. You think you are my safety net? You? You are a millstone around my neck. You are a drain on my wallet. I have been counting down the days until I could kick you out so I would not have to spend another $50 a week on your food. Who do you think you are? You are nothing. You have nothing. He leaned in close, his face inches from mine. Get out. Get out of my sight so I can finally breathe. Suit yourself, I whispered, before I could turn to the stairs to retrieve my bags. Brenda waved her hand dismissively. Don't bother going up. We already brought your trash down. She pointed to the front door. I turned. My 2 suitcases were not standing by the door. They were already outside. Through the glass panels of the front door, I could see them lying on the concrete porch, the fabric soaking up the freezing rain. And don't think about taking anything else, Robert growled. We checked those bags. Just your clothes and your school books. Anything we paid for stays here. I walked toward the door. As I reached for the handle, I heard a snicker from above. I glanced up toward the second-floor landing. Kyle was leaning over the railing, his phone held out in front of him. The ring light attached to the case reflected in his eyes, giving him a demonic, artificial glow. He was live streaming. Yo, guys, Kyle said to his phone, his voice pitched in that annoying influencer affectation. It is actually happening. The leech is getting the boot. Look at her. Happy birthday, loser. Check out the bags in the rain. Sad. He zoomed in on me. Say hi to the stream. Joy. Tell everyone how it feels to be homeless. I stared into the camera lens for a split second. I didn't scowl. I didn't hide my face. I gave the camera a small, enigmatic nod. Record this. Kyle, I thought, make sure you get high definition. This video will be Exhibit A in the defamation suit. I opened the front door. The wind hit me instantly. A physical blow of ice and water. It howled through the entryway, spraying rain onto Robert's precious hardwood floor. Close the damn door! Robert yelled from behind me. I stepped out. I didn't look back at them. I grabbed the handles of my suitcases. They were heavy, sodden with water. The zippers were strained. I could see the sleeve of my favorite sweater hanging out of a gap where they had forced the zipper shut, soaking up the muddy water from the porch. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. I heard the deadbolt slide into place, then the chain lock. Then, just for good measure, I heard Robert shouting through the wood. "And don't come back begging when you run out of money," he screamed, his voice muffled by the storm, but still clear enough to cut through the wind. "You starve in the street for all I care. You are dead to us." I stood there for a moment on the porch of the only home I had ever known. The rain plastered my hair to my skull. My cheap coat was already soaked through. A normal 18-year-old girl would be terrified. She would be pounding on the door, sobbing, promising to be better, promising to disappear into the attic if they just let her stay one more night. But I just stood there. I looked at the house. I looked at the peeling paint on the shutters that Robert was too lazy to fix. I looked at the gutters overflowing with leaves because Kyle refused to clean them. I looked at the new Audi in the driveway that they had bought for Kyle last month. A car purchased. I knew for a fact. By refinancing the house under a predatory interest rate they couldn't possibly afford. I looked at the house not like a daughter, but like a creditor looking at a bad investment that was about to be liquidated. Phase 1 complete, I murmured to the rain. I gripped the wet handles of my suitcases and began to walk. I didn't walk toward the bus stop at the end of the street, as they likely expected. I dragged my luggage down the driveway, the wheels clattering loudly on the uneven pavement. I walked past the neighbors' houses. I saw curtains twitch. Mrs. Gable next door was watching. Mr. Henderson across the street was peering through his blinds. Good. Let them see. Let them all be witnesses to the poor abandoned girl thrown out into the storm by her heartless father. The court of public opinion would be just as useful as the court of law. I walked 2 blocks, fighting the wind with every step. My hands were numb, my face stinging from the cold, when I turned the corner onto Oak Street. Out of sight of my father's house, I stopped. Waiting under the amber glow of a street lamp was a long black Lincoln Navigator. Its engine was idling quietly, puffs of white exhaust rising into the night air. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like voids. As I approached, the back door opened. A driver in a pristine black suit stepped out, holding a large umbrella. He didn't look at my ragged clothes or my soaked hair with judgment. He looked at me with deference. "Miss Everline," he said, holding the umbrella over me, shielding me instantly from the biting rain. "Mr. Harrison sent me. We have been waiting." He took the wet, muddy suitcases from my hands as if they were made of gold. "Please get inside. It is warm." I climbed into the back seat. The interior smelled of rich leather and cedar. The heater was running, wrapping me in a cocoon of warmth that made my skin tingle. I sat back against the plush seat, water dripping from my nose onto the upholstery. I reached into my wet pocket and pulled out my phone. It was dry. I dialed a number that was saved as The Wolf. It rang once. "Joy?" The voice on the other end was deep, gravelly, and sharp. It was Harrison. "Are you safe?" I looked out the window at the rain-streaked suburbia I was leaving behind. I saw the dark outline of the neighborhood that had been my prison. "I am in the car," I said. My voice was no longer the quiet, submissive whisper I used in Robert's house. It was cold, hard, and commanding. They did it, Harrison. They followed the script exactly. The eviction was verbal and physical. They destroyed my property. And Robert explicitly stated he has no intention of providing support. "Did he sign the waiver?" Harrison asked. "No," I said. But he publicly disowned me on a live stream broadcasted by his stepson, and he handed me a fraudulent document claiming no biological relation. "We have everything we need to break the implied trust." "Excellent," Harrison said. "I will file the motions in the morning. What are your instructions for tonight?" I wiped a drop of rain from my cheek. It was the only water on my face. "Activate Phase 2, I said. "Cut them off. I want every credit card, every subscription, and every hidden subsidy I have been covering to bounce by tomorrow morning." "And Harrison?" "Yes, Miss Everline?" "Send the notice of foreclosure on the second mortgage to the house," I said. watching the streetlights blur as the car accelerated. I wanted to arrive by certified mail. Let them enjoy their victory for exactly 12 hours. Consider it done, Harrison replied. Happy birthday, Joy. Thank you, Harrison, I said, and ended the call. I leaned back and closed my eyes. The car glided silently through the storm, carrying me away from the wreckage of my past and toward the empire I had built in the shadows. They thought they had thrown out the trash. They were about to find out they had thrown out the bank manager, and the vault was now closed. The elevator ride to the 45th floor of the Millennium Spire took exactly 42 seconds. I knew this because I had timed it the day I bought the place. I stood in the center of the mirrored cabin, watching the numbers climb, feeling the subtle pop in my ears as the air pressure changed. My wet sneakers squeaked against the polished marble floor, leaving muddy footprints that I would have to ask the cleaning staff to handle in the morning. When the doors slid open, I stepped directly into my living room. There were no hallways, no cramped entryways cluttered with coats and umbrellas. There was just open, expansive space. The entire north wall was floor-to-ceiling glass, framing the Chicago skyline like a living, breathing work of art. The city lights shimmered through the rain that was still lashing against the windows. But up here, the storm was just a visual effect. It was silent. It was distant. It was beneath me. I dropped my sodden suitcases on the Italian slate floor. I stripped off my soaking wet coat and threw it onto a chair that cost more than Robert's car. I walked to the wet bar, poured myself a glass of sparkling water with a twist of lime, and stood before the window, looking down at the dark, wet streets of the city. Somewhere down there, in a suburb that felt a million miles away, Robert and Brenda were probably toasting to their victory. They were likely sitting in the warmth of the living room, congratulating themselves on finally excising the cancer from their lives. They imagined me shivering under a bus stop awning, clutching a trash bag, crying over my lost childhood. I took a sip of the cold water and smiled. The reality was so much sweeter than their imagination. To understand how an 18-year-old girl ends up owning a $6 million penthouse, you have to understand that poverty is a mindset, but wealth is an algorithm. My mother, Catherine, died when I was 7. Robert always told me she was a dreamer. A woman with her head in the clouds who never contributed anything to the household. That was his first lie. My mother was a brilliant, underappreciated software engineer in the late 90s. She didn't leave me a fortune in cash. She left me something far more valuable, a patent. It was for a data compression algorithm. At the time she wrote it, it was clunky and ahead of its hardware. It sat gathering dust in a small, irrevocable trust she had set up for me, managed by a bank, completely untouchable by Robert. He knew about the trust, but he thought it contained a few $1,000s for college. He never bothered to look at the intellectual property attached to it. When I was 14, I hacked into my own trust documents. I found the source code my mother had written. I spent the next year of my life rewriting it. I modernized it, optimized it for cloud computing, and adapted it for high-frequency trading data streams. I didn't sell it as Joy Everline. The high school student, I created a persona. I sold the licensing rights to Stratosphere Dynamics for an initial payout of $2 million, with a back-end royalty deal that poured money into the trust every time the software was executed. Because I was a minor, the money went straight into the trust, locked away until my 18th birthday. But I didn't stop there. I was 15 when I read the white paper on cryptocurrency. While Kyle was spending his allowance on sneakers and video game skins, I was using the small allowance I scraped together from doing homework for rich kids to buy digital coins. I bought Ethereum when it was double digits. I bought Bitcoin when people still called it a scam. By the time I turned 17, my liquid net worth had crossed $10 million. And Robert? He was complaining about the price of milk. I turned away from the window and walked into the master bathroom. It was a sanctuary of white marble and gold fixtures. I turned on the taps of the jacuzzi tub, setting the temperature to a perfect 104 degrees. As the water filled the tub, steam began to rise, fogging up the mirrors. I stripped off my damp, thrift store clothes, the costume I had worn for years to survive in enemy territory, and stepped into the water. The heat enveloped me, melting the chill from my bones. I leaned my head back against the rim, closing my eyes. This was the moment of divergence. In one timeline, the timeline Robert believed in, I was destitute. In the real timeline, I was soaking in luxury, plotting the systematic dismantling of his life. But comfort was dangerous. It could make you soft. I sat up, shook the water from my hair, and reached for the waterproof tablet I kept on the side table. Work mode, I said aloud. The screen flared to life. I accessed the secure server where I kept my personal files. It was time to look at the autopsy of my family's finances. For the past 6 months, I had been quietly gathering data. I had access to Robert's bank accounts, his credit card statements, and his mortgage documents. I hadn't touched anything. I had just watched. But now, as I scrolled through the transaction history, the full extent of his betrayal became nauseatingly clear. I opened a file labeled Survivor Benefits. When my mother died, the government provided Social Security survivor benefits for me until I turned 18. The checks were issued monthly. They were meant for my care, for my clothes, my food, my education. I pulled up the spreadsheet where I had tracked every single deposit for the last 11 years. The total came to nearly $200,000. I cross-referenced the dates of the deposits with Robert's credit card payments. It was a perfect match, every month. The money meant for me was transferred out of the joint account and used to pay off his credit card debt. He had used my mother's death benefits to buy Brenda jewelry. He had used it to pay for Kyle's braces. He had used it to lease the cars they drove. I felt a cold knot of anger tighten in my chest. He hadn't just been not raising me, he had been robbing me. But the house was the bigger crime. I opened the folder labeled Property Deed. Robert always claimed he bought the house with his hard-earned money. He loved to play the lord of the manor, but the digital paper trail told a different story. The down payment for the house, made 2 months after my mother's funeral, was exactly the same amount as her life insurance payout, $350,000. He had taken the life insurance, money that was legally the community property of the marriage, but morally belonged to the stability of the family she left behind, and used it to buy a house that he then put solely in his name. Then, when he married Brenda, he added her to the deed. My mother bought that house with her life, and tonight they had thrown me out of it. The tablet chimed. A notification popped up. Visitor in lobby. Arthur Harrison. I pressed the button to grant him access to the private elevator. 10 minutes later, I was wrapped in a plush white robe, sitting at the mahogany dining table. The room was dim, lit only by the city glow and the blue light of our laptops. Arthur Harrison did not look like a man who would visit a client at midnight. He looked like a man who never slept. He was in his 50s, with silver hair cut with military precision and a suit that cost more than Robert's annual salary. He was the head of legal at Stratosphere Dynamics, but for the right price. He handled my personal affairs. He set a heavy leather briefcase on the table and clicked it open. "Happy birthday, Miss Everline," he said, his voice dry and devoid of unnecessary emotion. "I trust the accommodations are to your liking?" "The water pressure is excellent." "Harrison," I said, typing a command into my laptop to sync our screens. "Let us skip the pleasantries. Did you get the recording?" "I did," Harrison said. "The live stream your stepbrother posted was a gift. We have downloaded it, archived it, and notarized the transcript. Combined with the text messages Robert sent you last week, threatening to kick you out, we have irrefutable proof of constructive eviction and abandonment." "Good," I said. "Now, let us talk about the money." I projected the spreadsheet of the survivor benefits onto the wall monitor. Harrison adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. He scanned the columns of numbers, his eyes narrowing slightly. "This is embezzlement," he stated flatly. "Technically, as your custodial parent. He had discretion over how to spend the funds for your benefit. However, using it to pay for luxury goods for a stepchild and a new wife, while documenting that you were paying for your own school lunches and clothes that crosses the line into fraud. We can argue breach of fiduciary duty. I don't just want to argue. Harrison, I said, leaning back in my chair. I want to recover the assets. The house is mine. It was bought with my mother's insurance. The maintenance was paid for with my survivor benefits. And the second mortgage he took out to buy Kyle that car? That is debt he attached to my inheritance. Harrison nodded, typing rapidly on his keyboard. I can file a lis pendens on the property tomorrow morning. It will freeze the title. They won't be able to sell it or refinance it. Then we file a civil suit for conversion of funds, but that will take months. I know, I said. That is the long game. I want to talk about the short game. I want to talk about the invisible supports. I pulled up another file. This one was titled The Everline Foundation. It was a small charitable entity I had established 2 years ago to offset some of my tax liability from the crypto gains. It funded scholarships for underprivileged students in the Chicago area. It was anonymous. The recipients never knew who the donor was. They just knew they got a check for their tuition. I highlighted one name on the recipient list, Kyle Jenkins. Harrison looked at the screen and actually cracked a smile. It was a terrifying expression. You are paying for his college? Harrison asked. Robert and Brenda think Kyle got a merit scholarship. I explained. Kyle thinks he is a genius. The reality is, I saw the rejection letters piling up in the trash 2 years ago. I knew if he didn't go to college, he would never leave the house, and I would be stuck with him forever. So, I instructed the foundation to award him a special talent grant. I have been paying $40,000 a year for him to party at a private university. And the terms of the grant? Harrison asked. The terms state that the grant is revocable at any time at the discretion of the donor, particularly if the recipient ceases to demonstrate good moral character. I quoted from memory. I played a clip of the video Kyle had posted tonight, the one where he called me a leech and laughed while I stood in the rain. Is publicly humiliating a homeless teenager evidence of poor moral character? I asked innocently. I would argue it is definitive proof, Harrison agreed. Cut it, I said. Notify the university bursar's office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. The scholarship is terminated immediately. He will have 48 hours to pay the outstanding balance for the semester, or he will be administratively withdrawn. He won't be able to pay, Harrison noted. Robert does not have $40,000 liquid. I know, I said. That is the point. I stood up and walked back to the window. The rain was stopping, leaving the city washed clean and glittering. This isn't revenge, Harrison, I said, staring at my reflection in the glass. My eyes looked older than 18. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. This is a correction. For years. I have been the invisible pillar holding up that family. I paid for the house with my mother's death. I paid for the lifestyle with my survivor benefits. I paid for the golden child's future with my charity. They thought they were standing on their own 2 feet. They were standing on my shoulders. I turned back to the lawyer. I am simply stepping away, I said. Gravity will do the rest. Harrison closed his briefcase. The click echoed in the large room. I will prepare the paperwork, he said. Standing up. Stage 1 of the asset recovery begins at dawn. Do you want me to send a courier with the notifications? No, I said. Send it via certified mail. I want Robert to have to sign for it. I want him to hold the pen in his hand and wonder where it all went wrong. Harrison nodded and walked toward the elevator. Before he pressed the button, he paused. One more thing. Miss Everline, he said. The lab results regarding your DNA. Do you want me to order a legal test? To prove them wrong? I hesitated. I thought about the crumpled paper in my pocket. I thought about Robert's face when he screamed that I wasn't his. No, I said firmly. Not yet. Let them believe it. Let them believe they have no obligation to me. It will make it so much worse when they realize that blood was the only thing protecting them from me. When I finally reveal the truth, I want it to be the nail in the coffin, not the opening argument. Understood, Harrison said. The elevator doors slid open. Good night, Joy. Good night, Harrison. The doors closed, and I was alone again. I looked around my penthouse, my fortress of solitude. I walked over to the wall panel and pressed a button. The lights dimmed, and soft jazz began to play from the hidden speakers. I wasn't the girl in the attic anymore. I wasn't the maid. I wasn't the leech. I picked up my glass of water and raised it to the empty room. "To independence," I whispered. Then I sat down at my computer, opened the terminal, and executed the command that would cancel every credit card Robert had that was linked to my credit profile. The first domino had been flicked. Now, I just had to watch them fall. 2 months is not a long time in the grand scheme of the universe. It is barely enough time for a season to change or for a new habit to form. But in the fragile-sized, subsidized microeconomy of the Everline household, 60 days was exactly enough time for the Great Depression to arrive. I was not there to see it. Of course, I was busy restructuring my portfolio and decorating my penthouse with art that did not come from a discount bin. However, thanks to the thorough surveillance reports provided by Harrison's private investigators, I can reconstruct the collapse with almost cinematic clarity. It brings me a specific, cold kind of joy to imagine the look on Robert's face when the first domino fell. It started with the mailbox. For years, the mailbox had been a benign object. Robert would open it, find a few bills, perhaps a flyer for a pizza place, and the monthly statement for his bank account, which usually showed a steady, if modest, balance. He had no idea that the mailbox was actually a dam holding back a flood, and I was the engineer who had been reinforcing the concrete. The first shock was the electric bill. Robert had always assumed our electricity costs were high because I took too many showers or left my computer on. With me gone, he expected the bill to plummet. Instead, it arrived 3 weeks after I left, and the number was nearly double what he was used to. He did not realize that for the last 4 years, I had been paying 40% of the utility costs directly through the company portal using my own debit card. It was a maintenance fee. I charged myself to keep the peace. He stared at the bill, blaming the power company, blaming the government, blaming the weather. He paid it, grumbling, assuming it was an anomaly. Then came the first of the month. This was the day Robert usually went to the bank to withdraw cash for his walking around money. It was funded, unknowingly to him, by the Social Security survivor benefits check that the government deposited for my care. He had treated that deposit like a salary he earned for the hard work of tolerating my existence. He walked into the branch, slid his card into the ATM, and requested $500, insufficient funds. He must have frowned, wiped the screen, and tried again. Insufficient funds. He marched inside to yell at a teller. I can picture him, red-faced and indignant, demanding to know why the government had not paid him. The teller, likely a polite young woman, would have tapped on her keyboard and delivered the news that should have been obvious. "Sir, the survivor benefits are contingent on the beneficiary being a minor in your custody. The records show the beneficiary turned 18 and the address on file was updated to an independent residence 60 days ago. The payments have stopped." He had kicked me out to save money on groceries, not realizing he had just fired his primary breadwinner. He walked out of that bank $1,200 poorer per month. But the real comedy began with Kyle. Kyle, the golden boy, the genius, the future of the family. Kyle was supposed to be thriving at his private liberal arts college, a prestigious institution that cost $55,000 a year. Robert and Brenda bragged to everyone that Kyle was there on a merit scholarship because he was so gifted. They actually believed it. They believed it because they wanted to believe their son was special. They never questioned why a student with a C average and a history of disciplinary problems was awarded a full ride from a foundation they had never heard of. When I instructed Harrison to cut the funding from the Everline Foundation, the reaction was immediate. The university bursar is not a sentimental creature. When the check for the spring semester failed to clear, they sent a polite email to Kyle. Kyle, being Kyle, ignored it. He assumed it was a glitch. He assumed someone else would fix it. He went back to playing video games in his dorm room. 2 weeks later, the dean of students sent a letter. Kyle was administratively withdrawn. His keycard stopped working. His meal plan was canceled. On a Tuesday afternoon, while Brenda was bragging to her friends about how well Kyle was doing, a taxi pulled up to the driveway. Kyle tumbled out, looking disheveled and furious, dragging 3 laundry bags and his gaming computer. "They kicked me out," he screamed at his mother on the front lawn. "They said the money was gone. You said it was paid for. You made me look like an idiot." Brenda tried to soothe him, tried to blame the system, but the reality was sitting on the porch in a pile of dirty clothes. The golden boy was back, and he was hungry. Without the scholarship, Kyle was just an unemployed 19-year-old with expensive tastes and no skills. And without my survivor benefits, Robert had no way to feed him. The tension in the house began to curdle. Brenda, accustomed to a certain lifestyle funded by the illusion of solvency, went to her favorite boutique to buy a consolidation prize for herself, a new handbag to make her feel better about Kyle's return. She walked to the counter, placed the bag down, and handed over her platinum credit card. Declined. She laughed nervously. "Try it again. It is probably the chip." Declined. She pulled out another card. Declined. She did not know that those cards were authorized user accounts linked to a primary line of credit that I had established under Robert's name 3 years ago. Using my own assets as collateral to boost his credit score, I had done it to stop him from taking out predatory payday loans that would have threatened the house. When I severed my financial ties, his credit score did not just dip, it cratered. The banks, seeing the sudden removal of the high-value collateral, panicked and slashed his limits to the floor. She left the store empty-handed, humiliated, with the whispers of the sales clerks burning her ears. By the end of the second month, the house was a pressure cooker. There was no money for takeout. The heat was turned down to 60 degrees to save power. Kyle was sulking on the couch, eating the cheap cereal that Robert bought in bulk. Robert, desperate and furious, tried to call me. He pulled up my number, the one he had saved as Joy, mistake. He dialed. It went straight to a generic recording. "The number you have reached is not in service." He tried texting. Message, send failure. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that he did not know where I lived. He did not know where I worked. Really. He knew Stratosphere Dynamics, but when he called the main line, the receptionist, who had been briefed by Harrison, politely informed him that there was no employee named Joy Everline listed in the public directory. Powerless and cornered, Robert did what weak men always do. He decided to become the victim. He went to Facebook. He went to the neighborhood Nextdoor app. He even had Kyle help him record a video for TikTok. Although Kyle was hesitant to show his face after his own humiliation, Robert wrote a post that was a masterpiece of fiction. "I never thought I would have to do this," he wrote. "But my heart is broken. My daughter, Joy, ran away from home on her 18th birthday. We tried to give her everything, a home, love, support, but she fell in with a bad crowd. She stole our savings. She emptied the safe where we kept the money for her brother's tuition. She vanished, leaving us with nothing but debt and broken hearts. If anyone sees her, please tell her we just want her to come home and make things right. We forgive you. Joy. Just bring back what you took." It was a lie so bold, so audacious, that people believed it. The comments poured in. How could a child do that to her parents? "Stay strong. Robert, kids these days are monsters. I saw her walking in the rain that night. Poor Robert. She must have planned it." The narrative began to spread. In the small, incestuous world of our suburb, Robert was the grieving father, and I was the delinquent sociopath who had robbed him blind. I was sitting in my office at Stratosphere Dynamics when I found out. My office was a glass-enclosed corner suite on the trading floor. A far cry from the receptionist desk Robert imagined. The monitors around me were flashing with market data, green and red numbers dancing in a rhythm I understood perfectly. One of the junior analysts, a guy named Marcus, who followed local community pages for market sentiment analysis, knocked on my door. He looked uncomfortable. "Joy," he said, holding out his tablet. "You need to see this. It is trending in the Chicago local groups." I took the tablet. I read Robert's post. I read the comments calling me a thief. I read Brenda's reply in the comments, adding that I had also stolen her jewelry, a lie she probably told herself to explain why she had pawned it years ago. I felt a flash of irritation, not because they were lying, but because they were so bad at it. They were playing checkers while I was playing three-dimensional chess. "Do you want us to reply?" Marcus asked. "I can have the PR team draft a statement. We can bury this." "No," I said, handing the tablet back. "Do not engage with the clown. Marcus, you just invite the circus into your living room." I picked up my phone and dialed Harrison. "They are slandering me." "Harrison," I said calmly. "Public defamation, imputation of a crime. They are accusing me of theft and embezzlement on a public forum to solicit donations." "I saw it," Harrison said. His voice sounded like he was sharpening a knife. "I have already drafted the cease and desist letters. I am also preparing a suit for defamation per se. In Illinois, false accusations of a crime are actionable without proving special damages. We can sue for punitive damages." "Send the letters," I said. "But Harrison, do not send them alone." "What do you mean?" "It is time for the other shoe to drop," I said. "Send the foreclosure notice in the same envelope." There was a pause on the line. "The second mortgage?" "Yes." This was the secret I had kept hidden even from myself sometimes, because it was so pathetic. 5 years ago, Robert had gotten a hot tip from a friend at a bar about a penny stock. He was convinced it was the next Apple. He took out a second mortgage on the house, a high-interest, variable-rate loan from a predatory lender, to buy $50,000 worth of worthless shares. The stock went to zero in 3 months. Robert hid the loss from Brenda. He hid the loan, but I saw the mail. I saw the default notices starting to pile up. I knew if he defaulted, we would lose the house. I was 14. I didn't want to be homeless. So, I started paying the interest, every month, for 4 years. I used my crypto earnings to pay the minimum interest on the loan anonymously. I set it up so the statements went to a PO box I controlled. Robert thought the bank had just forgotten, or maybe he thought his friend had fixed it. He was delusional enough to believe anything that allowed him to sleep at night. When I left, I stopped paying. The loan had a clause: default on 3 consecutive payments, and the full balance becomes due immediately. With interest and penalties, the amount was now close to $80,000. The bank sent the notice of default to the P.O. box yesterday, I told Harrison. Forward it to his house. Let him see exactly what his bad investment costs now that his safety net is gone. It will arrive tomorrow, Harrison said. Joy, if they lose the house. They lost the house the day they signed that paper, I corrected him. I just stopped renting it for them. I hung up the phone. I looked out at the city. The irony was delicious. Robert was online, begging strangers for money to replace what he claimed I stole, unaware that the only reason he still had a roof over his head to type those lies under was because of the very daughter he was vilifying. He wanted to play the victim? Fine. I would give him a tragedy worthy of the role. The next evening, the stage was set. I wasn't there, but I knew the script. Robert would be sitting at the dinner table, staring at a plate of cheap pasta. Brenda would be nursing a glass of boxed wine, complaining that her friends were ignoring her texts. Kyle would be sullenly poking at his phone, blocking the friends from college who were asking why he had vanished. Then the doorbell would ring. It would not be a friend. It would be a process server. He would hand Robert a thick envelope. Inside, there would be 2 documents. The first, a cease and desist order, threatening a $5 million defamation lawsuit if he did not remove the social media posts within 1 hour and issue a public apology. It detailed, with terrifying precision, every dollar I had legally earned and every dollar he had misappropriated. The second, a notice of foreclosure, Bank of Chicago versus Robert Everline, demand for payment in full, $78,000, $450.12, payable within 30 days, or the property would be auctioned. I imagined the silence in the room as he read. I imagined the color draining from his face. I imagined the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He wasn't fighting a rebellious teenager. He was fighting a creditor, and he was insolvent. Back in my penthouse, I ordered sushi from the best place in the city. I sat on my white sofa, opened my laptop, and refreshed Robert's Facebook page. I watched the screen. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, then the post disappeared. "Smart move, Dad," I whispered, popping a piece of spicy tuna into my mouth. "But you are still going to lose the house." The war of attrition was over. The siege had begun, and the walls were about to come tumbling down. Destiny has a sense of humor, but it is rarely a kind one, usually. It is dark, twisted, and deeply ironic. 3 months after I left home, the universe decided to stage a collision between my old life and my new one. It happened at Le Monarque, the most exclusive French restaurant in downtown Chicago. This was a place where a single appetizer cost more than the weekly grocery budget of the Everline household, and where reservations were inherited rather than booked. I was there for business. Stratosphere Dynamics was closing a merger with a European fintech conglomerate, and as the lead architect of the algorithm that made the deal possible. My presence was required. I wasn't there to serve coffee or take notes. I was there as a partner. My evening began in the back of a stretched limousine. It was excessive, I admit. I usually preferred the understated luxury of a town car. But the European partners appreciated theatrics. They wanted to see American excess, so we gave it to them. I was wearing a suit that had been tailored to my exact measurements in Milan. It was a midnight blue silk wool blend, sharp enough to cut glass, worn over a cream blouse. On my wrist sat a Patek Philippe watch, a subtle flex that only people who knew watches would recognize. To the uninitiated, it was just a watch. To the men I was meeting, it was a signal that I belonged at the table. The car pulled up to the valet stand. The doorman, dressed in livery that looked better than my father's wedding suit, opened the door. "Good evening, Miss Everline," he said, bowing slightly. He knew my name. That was what membership bought you. I stepped out onto the red carpet runner, the flash of streetlights catching the diamond studs in my ears. The manager of Le Monarque, a terrifyingly impeccably dressed Frenchman named Henri, was waiting at the entrance. He bypassed the line of hopefuls waiting for a table and walked straight to me. "Mademoiselle Everline," Henri purred, kissing the air near my cheeks. "Your party is already seated in the private mezzanine. We have prepared the vintage Bordeaux you requested." "Thank you." "Henri," I said, my voice cool and composed. "Lead the way." We walked through the main dining room. The air smelled of truffle oil, expensive perfume, and old money. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables where captains of industry and socialites poked at foie gras. And then, there was the staff. They moved like shadows, dressed in crisp white jackets and black trousers, their hands gloved, their eyes lowered. They were the invisible machinery that kept the fantasy running. I was halfway to the stairs when I heard a sound that stopped conversation at the nearest 3 tables. It was the distinct, chaotic crash of shattering porcelain and silverware hitting marble. "You idiot!" a floor manager hissed, his whisper loud enough to carry. "That is the 3rd time tonight." I turned my head slightly, more out of reflex than interest. A waiter was on his knees, frantically trying to scoop up a shattered lobster bisque. The creamy orange soup was soaking into the knees of his ill-fitting trousers. His hair, usually styled with an entire bottle of gel, was falling into his eyes. He looked thin, pale, and utterly defeated. It was Kyle. For a second, I didn't believe it. Kyle, who thought manual labor was beneath him. Kyle, who mocked me for scrubbing floors. Kyle, the golden boy. Then I remembered the report Harrison had sent me a week ago. With his scholarship gone and his parents drowning in debt, Kyle had turned to online poker to make a quick fortune. He had lost, badly. He owed $4,000 to a bookie who did not accept IOUs. He had taken this job not out of a newfound work ethic, but out of terrifying necessity. I watched him. He was trembling. His hands were shaking so hard, he cut his finger on a shard of porcelain. Then, he looked up. Our eyes met. Time seemed to freeze. I was standing under the chandelier, bathed in golden light, wearing a suit that cost more than he would make in 6 months. He was on his knees in spilled soup, wearing a stained uniform, bleeding. The gap between us wasn't just physical, it was a canyon. It was the difference between the person who owns the building and the person who cleans it. His eyes went wide, his jaw went slack. He looked at me, then at Henri standing deferentially beside me, then back at me. The realization hit him like a physical slap. "Joy?" he whispered. Then, the shock turned into something else, something ugly. It was the same look Robert had given me, rage born of inferiority. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the mess, ignoring his manager who was grabbing his arm. "Joy!" he shouted. The restaurant went silent. People turned to stare. Kyle marched toward me, his face red, his eyes wild. He pointed a soup-stained finger at my chest. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Look at you. Look at these clothes." Henri stepped in front of me, his face a mask of icy professionalism. "Sir, step back immediately." Kyle shoved past him. He was running on adrenaline and humiliation. "You stole our money!" Kyle screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. "My dad said you stole everything, and now look at you, walking in here like you own the place." He looked me up and down, his lip curling in a sneer that was meant to be degrading but just looked pathetic. "Who are you banging, huh?" he yelled, looking around the room as if seeking an audience. "That is it, right? You found some old rich guy to pay for all this? You are nothing but a sugar baby. You are selling yourself while we starve." The accusation hung in the air, crude and vulgar against the backdrop of classical music and polite conversation. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I didn't even raise my voice. I looked at him with the same mild annoyance one might feel for a fly buzzing around a glass of wine. "Kyle," I said, my voice calm, projecting effortlessly across the silent room. "You have soup on your shoe." He looked down instinctively. In that split second, I looked at Henri and gave a single, sharp nod. It was all the signal needed. 2 large men in black suits materialized from the shadows near the entrance. They were not waiters. They were security. And they moved with the efficiency of predators. One grabbed Kyle's left arm, the other his right. They lifted him off the ground before he could look back up. "Get off me!" Kyle shrieked, kicking his legs. "She is a thief. That is my sister. She owes us money. She is a whore." His insults faded as he was dragged backward through the heavy oak doors. The silence returned to the dining room. Henri looked at me, mortified. "Mademoiselle Everline, I am deeply, deeply sorry. He was a new hire. He will be terminated immediately. Please, allow us to comp your dinner tonight." I smoothed the cuff of my jacket. "That won't be necessary. Henri, just ensure the floor is cleaned. It is a slipping hazard." I turned and walked up the stairs to my meeting. I didn't look back, but I knew the damage was done. Not to me, my reputation was bulletproof in that room, but to the fragile ecosystem of delusion my family lived in. Because before the security guards had dragged him out, I had seen Kyle fumble for his pocket. I had seen the flash of his phone camera. He had the picture. 2 hours later, across town. That picture was burning a hole in Robert's retina. I can only imagine the scene in the squalid little rental house they were forced to move into after the foreclosure process accelerated. The walls were thin. The carpet smelled of other people's pets, and the heating was spotty. Robert and Brenda must have been sitting on their second-hand couch when Kyle's text came through. Look at her. And then the photo, me, standing in the golden light of Le Monarque, looking like a queen. The focus was sharp enough to show the Patek Philippe on my wrist, sharp enough to show the cut of the silk suit. Robert didn't see a daughter who had succeeded. He didn't see a young woman who had built something from nothing. He saw a bank vault that had been left open. "She is not struggling," Brenda would have screeched, zooming in on the jewelry. "Look at that watch. Robert, that is a $20,000 watch, and we are eating canned beans." "She lied," Robert would have muttered, his face turning purple. "She said she was broke. She said she had nothing. She has millions. Brenda, millions." The narrative in their heads shifted instantly. They no longer cared about the DNA test. They no longer cared that I was another man's kid. In their minds, money had no DNA. Money was a common resource, and I was hoarding their share. "She owes us," Kyle would have said when he got home, fired and smelling of sour soup. "I lost my job because of her. She embarrassed me. She needs to pay." They fed off each other's greed. They spun a logic that was breathtaking in its insanity. If Joy is rich, and Joy was raised by us, then Joy's riches are the return on our investment. The next morning, Robert did not go to a job interview. He went to a strip mall near the highway, next to a vape shop and a discount liquor store. He walked into the office of Saul Associates, a law firm whose billboard promised, "We get you paid," in neon yellow letters. The lawyer, a man named Saul who wore a suit that was too shiny and smelled of desperation, must have listened to Robert's story with glee. He didn't care about the facts. He cared about the settlement. "So, let me get this straight," Saul likely said, leaning back in his creaky chair. "Your daughter, who you raised for 18 years, is now a multimillionaire, and she has left you, her aging, ailing parents, in destitution?" "Exactly," Robert lied. "My back is bad. I can't work like I used to. And her mother, my wife, is fragile." "And you supported her? Fed her? Clothed her?" "Everything," Brenda chimed in. "We gave her everything, and she abandoned us." Saul grinned. "In some states, there are filial responsibility laws. It is a long shot. But we can argue that by abandoning you in your old age, we will stretch the definition of that. She is liable for your support. Plus, we can sue for quantum meruit, reimbursement for the reasonable value of services rendered. Raising a child isn't free. Folks, it was a frivolous lawsuit. It was a joke. No reputable judge would entertain it, especially since Robert was 45, able-bodied, and had kicked me out, but it was enough to harass me. It was enough to try and force a settlement. 3 days later, I was in my office at Stratosphere Dynamics, the market was closing, and I was reviewing the day's gains. My assistant knocked on the glass door. She looked confused. "Miss Everline, there is a process server here. He says he has papers for you." I spun my chair around. "Send him in." A man in a windbreaker walked in, looking out of place among the glass and steel. He handed me a thick packet of papers. "Joy Everline?" "Yes." "You are served." He left. I picked up the packet. I read the cover page. Superior Court of Cook County Plaintiff, Robert Everline and Brenda Jenkins. Defendant, Joy Everline. Nature of suit, civil, filial support, / unjust enrichment / intentional infliction of emotional distress. I flipped to the demands. Plaintiff seeks monthly spousal equivalent support of $5,000. Plaintiff seeks retroactive reimbursement for room and board for 18 years, $324,000. Plaintiff claims defendant abandoned parents in a state of financial ruin, causing severe mental anguish. I read the part where they described Robert as elderly and infirm. He was 45 and played golf every weekend until I cut off his credit cards. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel afraid. I felt a rush of pure, cold adrenaline. I picked up my phone and called Harrison. "Harrison," I said, my voice bright and cheerful. "Clear my schedule for next week." "Why?" Harrison asked. "What happened?" "I just got served," I said, looking at the ridiculous document. "Robert is suing me for being a bad daughter." "You sound happy," Harrison noted, sounding confused. "I am happy, Harrison," I said. walking to the window to look out at the city that I owned a piece of. Because for the last 3 months, I have been playing defense. I have been cutting cords and dodging attacks. I dropped the lawsuit onto my desk. It landed with a satisfying slap. But now, I smiled, a shark-like grin that reflected in the glass. Now they have officially entered the legal arena. They have put their names on a sworn document. They have opened themselves up to discovery. The fish has taken the bait, I whispered, and I am going to gut it. Harrison, I said into the phone. Accept the service and schedule a pre-trial settlement conference. Tell them I am terrified. Tell them I want to settle. I want them all in one room. You want to meet them? Oh, yes, I said. I want to look them in the eye when I destroy them. They say that if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. My father and his new legal team were banking on that philosophy. For 2 weeks following the incident at the restaurant, the local media landscape became a sewer, and I was the rat they were trying to flush out. Robert and Brenda, guided by their ambulance-chasing lawyer, Saul, had launched a full-scale PR offensive. They gave interviews to local blogs. They posted tearful videos on social media. They painted a picture of a humble, hard-working couple who had sacrificed everything to raise a brilliant but sociopathic daughter who had now turned her back on them in their hour of need. The headlines were creative. I had to give them that. Tech prodigy abandons ailing father. The Ice Queen of Chicago. How Joy Everline forgot where she came from. Their demand was specific and audacious. They were suing me for $500,000. They claimed this figure represented the fair market value of 18 years of food, shelter, and clothing, plus emotional damages for the distress caused by my departure. It was a shakedown, plain and simple. They assumed that because I was young and newly wealthy, I would be terrified of bad publicity. They thought I would cut them a check just to make the noise stop. They did not understand that I thrive in the noise. Let them talk, I told Harrison when he suggested we issue a gag order. Let them put their narrative on the record. The more they lie now, the deeper the hole becomes when the truth comes out. We agreed to a pre-trial settlement conference. This is a standard legal procedure, a meeting where both parties sit down before a judge or a mediator to try and resolve the dispute without going to a full jury trial. Usually, these are dry, boring affairs held in cramped courthouse rooms, but Harrison, being the shark that he is, exercised a little-known clause in the venue rules. Since the discovery documents were so voluminous, a lie, but a useful one, we requested the meeting be held at the offices of the defendant's counsel to accommodate the evidence review. Saul agreed immediately. He probably thought it would be a chance to intimidate me on my own turf. The location was the main conference room of Harrison's law firm. Located on the 65th floor of the Ironwood Tower, we called it the Aquarium. 3 of the 4 walls were made of soundproof glass. The 4th wall was a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the entirety of Chicago. From up here, the cars looked like beetles and the people were invisible. I sat at the head of the table. The surface was a slab of polished black granite that felt like ice under my fingertips. I wore a charcoal gray suit, severe and unadorned, with my hair pulled back into a tight chignon. I looked less like a daughter and more like a judge. Harrison sat to my right. He had a single, thin file folder in front of him. He looked bored. At 10 o'clock sharp, the elevator doors opened. Robert led the way. He was wearing a suit that I recognized from 10 years ago. It was tight in the shoulders and the fabric had a slight sheen from overuse. He walked with a limp that I knew was fake, a prop for his ailing health narrative. Brenda followed, clutching a knockoff designer bag as if it contained the crown jewels. Kyle brought up the rear, wearing a button-down shirt that was untucked, looking around the opulent office with a mixture of jealousy and hunger. And then there was Saul. He was a short man who smelled of cheap cologne and tobacco. He carried a battered briefcase and walked with a bounce in his step that suggested he had already spent the settlement money in his head. They stopped at the door of the conference room. I saw Brenda's eyes widen as she took in the view. I saw Robert swallow hard. The sheer scale of the wealth on display here, the mahogany paneling, the modern art on the walls, the view that screamed power, was designed to make them feel small. "Please, have a seat," Harrison said, gesturing to the chairs on the opposite side of the table. He did not stand up. They shuffled in. The chairs were ergonomic masterpieces that cost $2,000 each, but my family looked uncomfortable in them. They looked like children called to the principal's office. Saul cleared his throat, trying to assert dominance. "Well, nice place you have got here. A bit excessive, perhaps, but I suppose that is where the money goes when you don't support your family." Harrison didn't even blink. "Save the opening statement for the judge. Saul, we are here to discuss your demand." Robert leaned forward. He placed his hands on the table, trying to look paternal and aggrieved. "Joy," he began, his voice trembling with a rehearsed emotion. "We didn't want it to come to this. We really didn't. But you left us no choice. You walked out. You cut us off. After everything we did for you." He looked at me. Waiting for a reaction, I gave him nothing. My face was a mask of polite disinterest. "I raised you," Robert continued, his voice rising. "I changed your diapers. I fed you. I put a roof over your head for 18 years. Do you know how expensive kids are? Do you? And now, you are sitting here in your ivory tower, sitting on millions, and you can't even spare a dime to help the people who made you who you are? It is shameful. It is disgusting." Brenda chimed in, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. "We just want what is fair. Joy, we have debts. We might lose the house. That house was your home, too." I listened. I let them finish. I let the silence stretch out after they stopped talking, letting their words hang in the cold. Conditioned air. "Are you finished?" I asked softly. "We want $500,000, Saul interjected, tapping a finger on the table. "Plus legal fees. You pay that, and we drop the suit. We sign a non-disclosure agreement. You never hear from us again. It is a bargain. Really, considering the PR nightmare we could continue to cause." I looked at Robert. "You said you raised me. You said you provided for me." "I did," Robert insisted. "I treated you like my own flesh and blood." "Like your own flesh and blood," I repeated slowly. "That is an interesting choice of words. Robert, considering the last thing you said to me before I left was that you were done raising another man's kid, and that the DNA test proved I wasn't yours." Robert's face turned a mottled red. That was in the heat of the moment. "And it doesn't matter. The law says if I acted as a father, I am entitled to the respect of a father." "Respect is not a legal currency," Harrison said, finally opening his mouth, "and neither is gratitude." Harrison placed his hand on the thin file in front of him. "We are very glad you brought up the financial specifics of raising Miss Everline. In fact, my client was so moved by your itemized list of expenses in your filing that she decided to conduct her own audit." Harrison slid the file toward me. I didn't open it. Instead, I picked up a small remote control. "I have prepared a presentation," I said. The blinds on the massive window automatically lowered. Dimming the room, a screen descended from the ceiling behind me. "Slide 1, I said. The screen flared to life. It displayed a scanned document. It was a life insurance policy payout form, dated 11 years ago. "This," I said, my voice clinical and detached, "is the payout for my mother's life insurance policy. $350,000. The beneficiary was listed as Robert Everline, to be used for the maintenance of the surviving household, specifically the minor child, Joy Everline." I clicked the remote. The screen changed to show a property deed. "And this," I continued, "is the deed to the house at 42 Oak Street, purchased 2 months later, cash payment, $350,000. The deed is in your name only. Robert, you used the funds meant to secure my future to buy an asset for yourself." "I bought the house for us," Robert sputtered. "For the family." "You bought it for yourself," I corrected. "And then you legally evicted the person whose money paid for it. That is called conversion of funds. But let us move on." I clicked the remote again. "Slide 2. Survivor benefits." A spreadsheet appeared. It was the same one I had shown Harrison, detailing the monthly payments from the Social Security Administration. $198,000 over 11 years, I recited. Designated for the care of the minor child. Yet, during those 11 years, I wore secondhand clothes. I paid for my own school lunches. I worked part-time jobs to buy my own textbooks. Where did the money go? I clicked again. A split screen appeared. On the left, the deposit dates of the government checks. On the right, the payment dates for a Premier auto leasing account. You leased a BMW, I said, and a Mercedes for Brenda. You drove my survivor benefits around town while I walked to school in the rain. Saul was shifting in his seat. He looked nervous. Look, this is all ancient history. Commingling of funds in a marriage is common. Robert was not married to my mother when he spent this money, I said sharply. He was a widower acting as a custodian, but you are right. Saul, let us talk about something more recent, something that isn't just unethical, but criminal. I leaned forward, locking eyes with Robert. Do you remember when I was 16, Robert? You wanted to renovate the kitchen. You applied for a loan. Robert went pale. He knew where this was going. I don't know what you are talking about, he mumbled. Slide 3, I said. The screen displayed a loan application for $20,000 from a predatory lender. At the bottom was a signature. Joy Everline. I was 16, I said. I could not legally sign for a loan, and even if I could, I didn't sign this. I was at a coding camp in California the week this document was notarized in Chicago. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen zoomed in on the signature. That is not my handwriting, I said. But it bears a striking resemblance to yours. Brenda. Brenda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I just signed what Robert told me to sign. I didn't know. That is forgery, Harrison stated, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. And since the loan was taken out in a minor's name, it is also identity theft. And since you used the U.S. mail to send the payments, it is mail fraud. That is a federal offense. The room was deadly silent. The arrogance that had walked in with them had evaporated, replaced by the suffocating weight of fear. You are suing me for $500,000, I said, standing up slowly. You claim I owe you for raising me, but the math doesn't work. Dad? I walked around the table, approaching them. They shrank back in their chairs. You took $350,000 from my mother's insurance. You took nearly $200,000 in survivor benefits. You stole $20,000 in a fraudulent loan. And that is before we calculate the interest. I stopped directly behind Robert's chair. I could smell his fear. It smelled like sweat and stale coffee. You don't just owe me an apology, I whispered. You owe me money. Harrison opened the thin file on the table. He pulled out a document and slid it across the granite toward Saul. This is not a settlement offer, Harrison said. This is a countersuit. Saul picked up the paper, his hands shaking. We are countersuing for embezzlement, fraud, conversion of assets, and breach of fiduciary duty. Harrison listed the charges calmly. We are seeking full restitution of the insurance money, the survivor benefits, and the fraudulent loans, with compounded interest and punitive damages. We are asking for $1.2 million. $1.2 million, Robert whispered, the color draining from his face until he looked like a corpse. I don't have that kind of money. We know, I said, walking back to my seat at the head of the table. That is why we are also filing a motion to attach your assets, the house, the cars, Brenda's jewelry, anything of value you possess now belongs to the court until this debt is settled. You can't do this, Brenda shrieked, standing up. We are your parents. You are the plaintiffs, I corrected her cold logic. You started a legal war. Did you really think I wouldn't bring ammunition? I sat down and looked at Saul. You have 5 minutes to withdraw your lawsuit with prejudice, I said. If you do, I might consider pausing the criminal referral to the district attorney regarding the forgery. I will still pursue the civil asset recovery, but I will let you stay out of prison." I paused, letting the threat sink in. "If you don't withdraw," I continued, "I will hand this file to the FBI before you reach the elevator lobby." Saul looked at Robert. He looked at the file. He looked at me. He realized he had walked into a slaughterhouse thinking he was the butcher, only to find out he was the cattle. "We withdraw," Saul said quickly, slamming his briefcase shut. "Robert, sign the withdrawal. We are leaving." "But," Robert stammered. "Sign it," Saul yelled, losing all professional composure. "She has got you on felonies, you idiot. Sign the paper." Robert took the pen Saul shoved at him. His hand shook so badly he could barely form the letters. He signed the withdrawal of his claim. I watched him sign. It didn't bring me happiness. It didn't bring me warmth. But it brought me a sense of balance. The scales of the universe were finally tipping back to center. "Get out," I said. They scrambled for the door. Kyle didn't look at me. Brenda was sobbing. Robert looked like a man who had been hollowed out. As the door clicked shut behind them, the room returned to its pristine silence. Harrison picked up the signed withdrawal and inspected it. "That went well," he noted dryly. "It is not over," I said, looking at the blank screen where the evidence of their betrayal had just been displayed. "We stopped their attack, but now we have to finish the war." I turned to the window, looking down at the city. Somewhere down there, Robert was realizing that the trap hadn't just snapped shut on his leg, it had cut it clean off. "Prepare the next phase." "Harrison," I said, "they still think this is about money. They still think I am just a lucky kid with a good lawyer. They have no idea what I am actually worth." "They will find out soon enough," Harrison said. "Yes," I replied. "They will." The ink on the withdrawal agreement was barely dry. Saul, their cut-rate lawyer, was already packing his briefcase with the frantic energy of a man escaping a burning building. He wanted to be out of that room, out of that building, and as far away from the criminal implications of the forgery as possible. But Robert was not moving. He sat frozen in his chair, his hands gripping the edge of the granite table until his knuckles turned white. He was breathing hard, a shallow, rasping sound that filled the sudden silence of the room. He had just signed away his right to sue me. He had just admitted, legally, that he had no claim, but his pride, that fragile, toxic thing that had driven him for years, would not let him leave defeated. He needed one win. He needed one thing that made him superior to the 18-year-old girl who had just outmaneuvered him. He looked up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and filled with a hateful desperation. "Fine," Robert spat, his voice trembling. "You win the money. Joy. You have the lawyers. You have the tricks. You can take the house. You can take everything." He stood up shakily, pointing a trembling finger at me. "But you are still a bastard," he sneered. "You can buy all the fancy suits you want, but you cannot buy a bloodline. That DNA test was real. I saw it with my own eyes. You are not my daughter, and knowing that, knowing I didn't spawn a monster like you, that is worth more to me than any house." Brenda, who had been weeping into a tissue, suddenly went very still. She stopped crying. She didn't look at Robert. She looked at the floor, her body rigid. I watched her reaction. It confirmed everything my private investigators had suspected. "Sit down." "Robert," I said. My voice was not loud, but it had the weight of a gavel striking a sounding block. "I am leaving," Robert shouted, turning toward the door. "I said sit down," I repeated, sharper this time. "Unless you want Harrison to call the district attorney right now and add paternity fraud to the list of investigations." Robert hesitated. The threat of prison was a powerful tether. He slowly sank back into his chair, looking defiant but trapped. "What are you talking about?" he growled. "The test was negative. 0%. You saw it." "I saw a piece of paper," I corrected him. "A piece of paper from a strip mall lab that allows customers to bring in their own swabs without a witness." I reached into the leather portfolio that lay on the table before me. I pulled out a single, sealed envelope. It was heavy, cream-colored, and bore the embossed seal of the Northwestern Medicine Genetics Center, one of the most respected laboratories in the country. "Do you know why I never cried that night?" I asked, holding the envelope in midair. "Do you know why, when you screamed that I wasn't yours, I didn't fall apart?" Robert stared at the envelope. "Because I have eyes, Robert," I said. "I have your nose. I have your chin. I have the same genetic disposition for nearsightedness that you have. But more importantly, I know how to run a control test." I slid the envelope across the black granite. It hissed softly as it moved, stopping directly in front of him. "Open it," I commanded. Robert looked at the envelope as if it were a bomb. His hand shook as he reached for it. He tore the seal. He unfolded the document. I recited the results from memory as he read them. Subject 1, Robert Everline. Subject 2, Joy. Everline. Relationship probability, 99.9998%. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "I am your daughter, Robert, biologically, genetically, undeniably, I am the only child you ever created." Robert stared at the paper. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The defiance drained out of him, replaced by a confused, terrifying hollowness. "But," he whispered, his voice cracking, "the other test." "The other test was real," I explained calmly. "The lab didn't fake the results. They ran the samples they were given, but they weren't given your DNA and mine." I shifted my gaze to Brenda. She was pale, her skin taking on the color of old parchment. She was trembling so violently that her bracelets jingled softly against the table. "Tell him, Brenda," I said. Robert turned his head slowly to look at his wife. It was the movement of a rusted machine. "Brenda?" he asked. "What is she talking about?" Brenda couldn't speak. She shook her head frantically, tears leaking from her eyes. Real tears this time. Tears of terror. "She can't tell you," I said. "So I will. The week before my birthday, Brenda volunteered to mail the samples. You swabbed your cheek. You swabbed mine while I was sleeping, which, by the way, is assault. But we will let that slide for a moment. You put them in the kit. You sealed it." I looked at Kyle, who was sitting in the corner, looking bored and confused. "But Brenda didn't mail that kit," I continued. "She bought a second kit. She swabbed her own son, Kyle, and then she swabbed you. Robert," I let that sink in. "She sent in a sample comparing you and Kyle," I said. "Of course the result was 0%. Kyle isn't your son, but you were so eager to get rid of me, so eager to believe the worst, that you didn't even check the names on the sample IDs. You just saw negative and felt relieved." Robert looked at Brenda with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It was horror. It was the look of a man realizing the floor he stood on was actually a trap door. "You," Robert stammered, "you lied to me?" "I did it for us," Brenda suddenly shrieked. Finding her voice, she grabbed Robert's arm. "Robert, listen to me. She was a burden. She was always there, staring at us with those creepy eyes. We needed the money. We needed her out. I thought if you believed she wasn't yours, it would be easier. You wanted her gone too. Don't look at me like that. You hated her just as much as I did." Robert pulled his arm away as if she burned him. He stood up, stumbling back, knocking his expensive chair over. "I kicked her out," he whispered, staring at the wall, his eyes unfocused. "I threw my own daughter out in the rain." He looked at me. For the first time in years, he really looked at me. He saw the resemblance he had forced himself to ignore. He saw his own features reflected in my face, but sharpened by an intelligence he never possessed. The cruelty of the truth washed over the room. It was suffocating. He had traded me. He had thrown away his biological child, a prodigy, a millionaire, a girl who had quietly paid his debts for years, to protect a lie. And for what? For Kyle? He looked at Kyle. Kyle was currently picking at a hangnail, oblivious to the tragedy unfolding, annoyed that this drama was taking so long. Kyle, who had flunked out of college. Kyle, who was being sued for gambling debts. Kyle, who wasn't even his blood. Robert had destroyed his relationship with a diamond to protect a piece of gravel. "Joy," Robert gasped, taking a step toward me. His face crumpled, the arrogant mask disintegrated, leaving behind a pathetic, weeping old man. "Joy, I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. She tricked me. Brenda tricked me." He held out his hands, pleading. "I am your dad. Joy, I am your father. Please, you have to understand. I was deceived. I would never have done it if I knew. We can fix this. We are family. Blood is thicker than water, right?" I watched him beg. I watched the tears roll down his cheeks. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no vindication, just a cold, empty clarity. "Stop," I said. He froze. "Do not talk to me about blood," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that echoed in the glass room. "You lost the right to that word the night you handed me a trash bag instead of a birthday cake." "But I was lied to," he cried. "You wanted to be lied to," I shot back. That hit him harder than a physical blow. He flinched. "Do not pretend you are a victim here, Robert," I said, walking around the table until I was standing inches from him. I was tall in my heels, looking him directly in the eye. "You accepted that fake test without a second thought. You didn't ask for a retest. You didn't question it. You didn't feel sad. You felt happy." I pointed at the window, at the stormy city below. "You smiled when you kicked me out," I reminded him. "You laughed. You were relieved to have an excuse to discard me. You didn't hate me because you thought I was another man's child. You hated me because I was yours. And I wasn't like you. I was smart. And you were mediocre. I was independent. And you were needy. You wanted to believe that lie because it absolved you of the guilt of being a terrible father." Robert fell to his knees. It was a theatrical, desperate gesture. He grabbed the hem of my jacket. "No, no, Joy, please," he sobbed. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. Forgive me. I am an old man. I have made mistakes. But don't destroy me. Don't leave me with them." He gestured vaguely at Brenda and Kyle. "I have nothing without you." I looked down at his hands clutching my expensive Italian wool. I gently, but firmly, peeled his fingers off my jacket. I stepped back, dusting off the spot where he had touched me. "You are right," I said. "You have nothing, but that is not my problem anymore." I turned to Harrison. "What is the status of the repayment schedule?" Harrison cleared his throat, stepping into the emotional vacuum with professional efficiency. "Regarding the misappropriation of the life insurance funds," Harrison said, consulting his file. "Since we have established that Robert Everline is, in fact, the biological father and legal custodian, his use of the funds for personal gain, specifically purchasing a home in his own name and excluding the beneficiary, moves from simple conversion to custodial fraud." Harrison looked down at Robert, who was still kneeling on the carpet, wiping his nose. "The principal amount was $350,000, Harrison stated. "However, calculating the investment growth that money would have earned had it been properly invested in the trust as intended over 11 years, plus the statutory interest of 9% per annum for fraud, plus the penalties for the misuse of survivor benefits." Harrison paused for effect. "The total restitution required to avoid criminal prosecution is $2,140,000. Robert looked up. His eyes were wide and glassy. $2 million? $2 million, I confirmed. "Payable immediately." "I don't have $2 million, Robert wailed. "I have nothing. The bank is taking the house. My credit is ruined." "Then you have a problem," I said coldly. I walked back to the head of the table and picked up my remote. I pressed a button, and the blinds began to rise, flooding the room with the harsh, bright light of the midday sun. "Here are your options, Robert," I said, silhouetted against the light. "Option A. You pay me back every single cent you stole from my mother's legacy. Option B. You go to prison for fraud, forgery, and identity theft. There has to be another way, Brenda wept. Joy, please, have mercy. Mercy? I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Mercy is for family. You made it very clear that I am not family. I am just a creditor, and you are in default. I looked at Harrison. Give them the ultimatum. Harrison pulled a document from his briefcase. He handed it to Robert. This is a confession of judgment, Harrison explained. If you sign this, you admit to the debt. You agree to liquidate all remaining assets, the cars, the jewelry, the electronics, any retirement accounts you may have. You will turn over everything to Miss Everline. In exchange, she will petition the court to suspend the criminal charges, provided you make monthly restitution payments for the remainder of your life. For the rest of my life? Robert whispered. Or prison, Harrison said simply. 10 to 15 years, federal. Robert looked at the paper. He looked at Brenda, the woman whose lie had brought them here. He looked at Kyle, the boy he had bet everything on. He realized then that he was already in prison. He had built it himself, brick by brick, lie by lie. I will sign, Robert whispered. Good, I said. But do it outside. You are cluttering up my conference room. I turned my back on them. I heard the shuffling of feet, the sobbing of Brenda, the heavy, defeated footsteps of my father. Joy? Robert said from the doorway. One last attempt. I didn't turn around. Goodbye, Mr. Everline. The door closed. The silence returned. I stood there for a long time, staring at the horizon where the blue of the sky met the gray of the lake. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't sadness. It was the feeling of a heavy weight, one I had carried since I was 7 years old, finally being cut loose. Are you okay? Harrison asked gently. I am fine, Harrison, I said, watching a cloud pass over the sun. I just realized something. What is that? He was right about one thing, I said. He didn't raise me, I raised myself, and I did a hell of a better job than he ever could have. The heavy mahogany door had barely clicked shut when it opened again. It didn't open with the force of an exit, but with the hesitant, trembling slide of a man who realized there was nothing for him in the hallway but a life of ruin. Robert stood in the threshold. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The bluster, the arrogance, the righteous indignation of the father figure, it was all gone. In its place was a terrified man staring into the abyss of a $2 million debt he could never hope to repay. He stumbled back into the room, ignoring Harrison's sharp look of annoyance. Brenda followed him, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face, clutching her fake designer bag like a life preserver. Kyle lingered in the doorway, looking from his parents to me, his face a mask of dull confusion and growing panic. I cannot do it, Robert rasped. His voice was wet and thick with tears. Joy, please, you have to listen to me. I cannot sign that confession. I cannot pay you $2 million. I am bankrupt. The bank is taking the house. My credit cards are frozen. I have $40 in my wallet. And that is it. He took a step toward me, his hands clasped together in a pleading gesture that looked grotesque on a man who had once towered over me. I am ruined, he sobbed. If you force this, if you send me to prison or make me pay this for the rest of my life, you are killing me. Is that what you want? To kill your own father? I sat at the head of the table, my fingers steepled, watching his performance. It was pathetic, but it was also genuine. The reality of the numbers had finally pierced his delusion. Brenda stepped forward then, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. She saw that begging for mercy wasn't working, so she tried a different tactic. She tried to leverage the very thing she had always envied, my success. Joy, look at this place, Brenda said, her voice rising in a shrill, desperate pitch. She gestured wildly at the glass walls, the panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, the expensive art, the custom furniture. You are clearly doing well. You have this company, you have fancy lawyers, you have all this. She took a breath, her eyes darting around the room, calculating the value of everything she saw. $2 million? She scoffed, a nervous, hysterical laugh bubbling up. That is a lot of money to us. Sure, but to you? Look at you. It is probably just a write-off. It is pocket change. Why are you squeezing us for pennies when you are sitting on a gold mine? She stepped closer, her voice turning wheedling and manipulative. He is your father, Joy. Even if he made mistakes, even if we messed up, you can't destroy him over money you don't even need. You are rich. What is a couple of million to you? You probably make that in a year. I felt a cold smile tug at the corners of my mouth. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was the smile of a predator watching prey walk voluntarily into a trap. A year? I repeated softly. Yes, Brenda insisted, emboldened by my reaction. You are a big-shot CEO now, right? You have millions. Just let it go. Write a check to cover the debt. Let us keep the house, and we will go away. We will sign the NDA. It is nothing to you. Robert looked up, hope kindling in his watery eyes. She is right, Joy. You have so much. Why take the little bit we have left? Be the bigger person. Be the daughter I know you can be. Help your dad out. I looked at them. They were so small. Their imaginations were so limited. In their world, being rich meant owning a Lexus and having a paid-off mortgage. They thought I was a millionaire, in the sense that I maybe had $1 or $2 million in the bank. They thought asking for $2 million was asking for half my fortune. They had no idea. I turned my chair slightly to face the large screen that was still blank behind me. You think I have a few $1,000,000? I said, my voice conversational, almost bored. You think this is about me hoarding a small pile of gold while you starve? I looked back at Harrison. Harrison, they seem to be under the impression that I am merely well off. I think it is time we corrected that misconception. Don't you? Harrison smiled. It was the first time I had seen him smile with genuine pleasure all day. He tapped a few keys on his laptop. Loading the consolidated financial report now. Miss Everline, he said. Sit down, I commanded them. Robert and Brenda sank onto the nearest chairs, too terrified to disobey. You wanted to know my worth, I said, standing up and walking toward the screen. You wanted to know if $2 million matters to me. Let me answer that question with absolute transparency. The screen flared to life. It was not a simple document this time. It was a high-definition presentation, the kind used in boardrooms to impress billionaire investors. The first slide appeared. It featured the logo of Stratosphere Dynamics, sleek and silver against a black background. Asset Class 1. Equity, I began, using my laser pointer to circle the graphic. You know I work at Stratosphere Dynamics, I said. You thought I answered phones. Then you thought I was a junior developer. The truth is, I am a silent partner. The algorithm I wrote when I was 15, the one I developed while sitting on the floor of my attic room because you wouldn't buy me a desk, is the core engine of this firm's trading platform. I clicked the remote. A pie chart appeared. A large slice was highlighted in blue. I own 15% of the firm, I stated. Stratosphere Dynamics manages $3 billion in assets. My equity stake is not liquid cash, but it is fully vested. Based on the most recent valuation from our merger talks last week, the value of my shares alone is, the number flashed on the screen, $18,500,000. $18,500,000, I read aloud. I heard a sound from the table. It was a sharp intake of breath, like someone had been punched in the gut. I looked at Robert. His mouth was hanging open. His eyes were bulging. He looked like he was trying to process a language he didn't speak. 18 million? He whispered. We are just getting started, I said, clicking the remote. The screen changed. The background shifted to a digital matrix of binary code. The header read, Digital Asset Portfolio / Cryptocurrency Holdings, Asset Class 2, Crypto, I announced, while Kyle was spending his allowance on video games. I was buying Bitcoin at $300 a coin. I was buying Ethereum when it was under $10. I didn't sell when the market crashed. I bought more, I held, and I diversified. A bar graph rose on the screen, climbing higher and higher until it nearly touched the top. These assets are held in cold storage wallets, I explained. Untraceable, secure, and fully liquid. As of this morning's trading price, my digital portfolio is valued at— the number slammed onto the screen. $12,200,000. $12,200,000, I said. Brenda let out a whimper. She brought her hands to her face, pressing her fingers against her cheeks. She was shaking her head back and forth, muttering, "No, no, no," as if denying the reality could make the money disappear. "That is 30 million, Robert stammered. He was gripping the arms of the chair so hard the leather was creaking. "You have $30 million? "I am not finished," I said coldly. I clicked the remote again. The screen shifted to a map of downtown Chicago. Several red pins dropped onto the map. "Asset Class 3, real estate," I said. "I don't just own the penthouse I live in. I own the commercial unit on the ground floor of this building. I own a warehouse in the logistics district. And I own an apartment complex in Lincoln Park that generates $40,000 a month in passive income." The map zoomed out, showing the properties. "All purchased through shell companies," I added. "All paid for in cash, no mortgages, no debt." The valuation appeared. $15,100,000. $15,100,000 in real estate assets, I said. The room was silent. Not the silence of a library, but the silence of a vacuum. The air seemed to have been sucked out of the space. The only sound was the low hum of the projector fan and the ragged, shallow breathing of my father. "So," I said, turning to face them, "let us look at the total." I pressed the final button on the remote. The screen went black for a second, building the tension. Then, in massive, glowing green font, a single number appeared in the center of the display. Net worth, $45,800,000 US. I stood to the side so they could see it clearly. I wanted it to burn into their retinas. $45,800,000, I said, my voice ringing with finality. I looked at Robert. "You asked me if $2 million matters to me. Mathematically? No. It is less than 5% of my net worth. I could write a check for your debt right now and not even notice the difference in my bank account. I could buy your house 10 times over and burn it down for sport." Robert stared at the number. His face had gone past pale. It was now a terrifying shade of grayish-purple. His eyes were locked on the green digits. He was doing the math. He was calculating not just the money, but the time. He was realizing that while he was screaming at me for eating an extra slice of bread, I was building an empire. He was realizing that while he was calling me a burden, I was already richer than everyone he had ever met, combined. 45 million, Robert mumbled. His voice was faint, breathless. "Yes," I said. "And the irony, Robert, the absolute tragedy of your life? If you had just been a decent father, if you had just treated me with a shred of kindness, if you hadn't thrown me out into the rain, all of this would have been yours to share." I took a step closer to him. "I would have bought you a house," I said softly. "I would have paid off your debts. I would have sent you on vacations. I would have taken care of you for the rest of your life, not because I had to, but because that is what family does." Robert's eyes dragged away from the screen to look at me. The regret in them was bottomless. It was a physical pain, a crushing weight of missed opportunity and realized stupidity. "My daughter," he wheezed. "My little girl." "But you didn't want a daughter," I reminded him. "You wanted to save grocery money." The reality of it hit him all at once. The magnitude of his loss. He hadn't just lost a lawsuit. He had lost a winning lottery ticket that he had held in his hand for 18 years and then crumpled up and threw in the trash. Robert stood up, or at least, he tried to. He pushed himself up from the chair, his hand clutching at his chest. His face turned a deep, alarming beet red. 45, he gasped. His eyes rolled back in his head. His knees buckled. It happened in slow motion. One moment he was standing, staring at the number that represented his life's greatest failure. The next, he was collapsing. He didn't crumple gracefully. He fell like a tree. His body hit the expensive carpet with a heavy, dull thud that shook the table. "Robert!" Brenda screamed. She threw herself onto the floor next to him. "Robert! Oh my God! Robert, wake up!" Kyle stood up, knocking his chair over, looking terrified. "Dad? Dad!" I didn't move. I stood by the screen, the green light of the $45,800,000 illuminating my silhouette. I watched Harrison calmly pick up the phone on the conference table. "Security," Harrison said into the receiver. "We have a medical emergency in the aquarium. Male, mid-40s, possible cardiac event. Call 911. I looked down at my father. He was lying on his back, his mouth open, his breathing shallow and rattling. He wasn't dead. I could see his chest moving, but he was broken. The shock of the truth had literally short-circuited his system. He had wanted to see my worth. He had wanted to know the value of the daughter he discarded. Well, now he knew, and the price tag was too high for his heart to handle. Phase 3 complete, I whispered to myself, turning my back on the chaos to look out the window at the city I had conquered. The silence that followed Robert's collapse lasted less than a second before it was shattered by the chaotic noise of panic. Brenda threw herself across his chest, her screams piercing the sterile, climate-controlled air of the conference room. She was shaking him, slapping his cheeks, wailing his name with a theatrical intensity that seemed designed for an audience. "Robert, Robert, breathe. Don't you leave me. Don't you dare die on me." I stood motionless by the screen. The giant green numbers, $45,800,000, cast a ghostly, artificial glow over the scene. It was a tableau of absolute absurdity. My father was lying on the floor, possibly having a heart attack caused by the realization of his own stupidity, and his wife was weeping over him, but even in her hysteria. Brenda remained true to her nature. I watched her eyes, as she screamed for her husband to wake up. Her gaze kept darting up. She wasn't looking at the ceiling. She was looking at the screen behind me. She was looking at the number. Even as she checked his pulse, her mind was calculating the inheritance laws. If Robert died right now, she was his next of kin. If I was Robert's daughter, and I had millions, her greed was a reflex, involuntary and disgusting, overriding even her fear of death. "He is breathing," Harrison said, kneeling beside Robert and checking the carotid artery with professional detachment. "Pulse is rapid and thready. It is likely a hypertensive crisis induced by shock." Harrison looked up at me. "The ambulance is 2 minutes out. Building security is bringing the AED, just in case." I nodded. "Keep him alive. Harrison, he can't pay me back if he is dead." Kyle, who had been standing near the door like a frightened child, suddenly seemed to snap out of his stupor. He looked at his father on the floor. Then he looked at me. He looked at the suit I was wearing. He looked at the room. And finally, he looked at the money on the screen. He didn't run to help his mother. He didn't kneel beside the man who had raised him. He walked toward me. He moved with a hesitant, shambling gait, his hands held out in a gesture of surrender. The sneer he had worn at the restaurant, the arrogance he had displayed on his TikTok livestream, it was all gone. In its place was a desperate, fawning familiarity. "Joy," he said, his voice cracking. He tried to smile, but it looked like a grimace. "Joy. Sis, oh my God, this is crazy, right? Look at Dad. He is really sick." I watched him approach. I didn't step back. I just stared at him with the same cold curiosity one might have for a cockroach that had survived a nuclear blast. "Stay back, Kyle," I said calmly. "No, listen," Kyle pleaded. ignoring my command and stepping closer. I know we have had our differences. I know I was a jerk sometimes, but we are family, right? We are brother and sister. We grew up together. You can't just let him die. You can't let us fall apart. He reached out as if to touch my arm, trying to bridge the gap between us with a physical connection. I know you are mad, but look at all this money. Joy. We can fix everything. You, me, Mom, Dad. We can be a real family again. I promise. I will be better. I will be the best brother you ever had. I looked at his hand hovering near my sleeve, the same hand that had held the phone while he filmed me standing in the rain, the same hand that had dropped the tray of soup at the restaurant. "Don't touch me," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it froze him instantly. "Brother?" I repeated the word, tasting the bile in it. "You are not my brother. Kyle, you are the son of my father's wife. We share no blood. We share no history other than the fact that we occupied the same house while you tormented me and I paid for your lifestyle." "That is not fair," Kyle whined, reverting to his childish self. "I was just doing what they told me." "You are 19 years old," I said. "You are an adult. You made a choice." I pulled my phone from my pocket and unlocked it. I tapped the screen and held it up to his face. It was a screenshot of his TikTok video, the one where he zoomed in on my wet, miserable face and laughed. "This is not how a brother treats a sister," I said. "This is how a stranger treats a victim. Joy, please. You are a stranger to me." "Kyle," I said, putting the phone away. "A stranger who owes my foundation $40,000 for a fraudulently obtained scholarship. Now, step back before I have security remove you for harassment." Kyle blanched. He stepped back, his shoulders slumping. He realized the family card had been declined, just like his mother's credit cards. At that moment, the double doors of the conference room burst open. 2 paramedics in navy blue uniforms rushed in, pushing a gurney and carrying heavy medical bags. A security guard from the building lobby followed them. "Where is the patient?" the lead paramedic shouted. "On the floor," Harrison directed, stepping aside. "Male, 45. Sudden collapse after emotional distress. History of high blood pressure." The room descended into a flurry of activity. Velcro ripped open, monitors beeped, voices barked commands. They cut open Robert's cheap dress shirt, exposing his pale, heaving chest. They slapped electrodes onto his skin. "BP is 200/110, the medic called out. "Heart rate 140. He is in hypertensive crisis. We need to stabilize him before transport." Brenda was sobbing louder now, clutching Robert's hand. "Is he going to die? Tell me he is not going to die." "Ma'am, please step back," the medic said firmly. "We need room to work." I watched from my vantage point. I saw Robert's eyes flutter open. He was conscious, but groggy. He looked around wildly, the oxygen mask fogging up with his panic. He saw the medics. He saw the ceiling. Then he saw me. He tried to speak, but the medic put a hand on his chest. "Sir, try to relax. You are having a medical event." I walked over to the table where Harrison was organizing the papers. The chaos was swirling around us, but we were in the eye of the storm. "Harrison," I said quietly, "draft the agreement, now." Harrison looked at me, eyebrows raised. "Now, while he is being loaded onto a stretcher?" "This is the moment of maximum leverage," I said. "He is terrified of dying. He is terrified of prison, and he has just seen what he lost. He will sign anything to make the pain stop." Harrison nodded. He was a professional. He opened his laptop and began to type furiously. The sound of his keys clacking was a rhythmic counterpoint to the beeping of the heart monitor. "What are the terms?" Harrison asked. "Total capitulation," I said. "I want a full release of all parental rights. He disowns me, legally and irrevocably. He acknowledges that he has no claim to my estate, my earnings, or my future. He waives the right to ever contact me again." "Done," Harrison said. "And the debt?" I will suspend the collection of the $2 million debt, I said, and I will withhold the criminal referral to the FBI regarding the forgery and fraud. In exchange for? In exchange for his signature on the release, I said. And one more thing. The house. Harrison paused. The house is already in foreclosure. The bank owns it. No, I corrected him. The bank holds the mortgage note, but the title there is a clause in my mother's original will. The trust she set up for me had a provision regarding the marital home. If Robert ever remarried or mishandled the assets, the trust had the option to exercise a lien on the property. I pulled a folded document from my inner jacket pocket. I exercised that lien this morning, I said. Technically, the trust now holds the primary position on the deed. The bank is secondary. I am the landlord. Harrison smiled. Brilliant. The condition is simple, I said, looking at the paramedics lifting Robert onto the gurney. They vacate the property. They leave everything behind except their personal clothing. No furniture, no electronics, no appliances. They walk out the way they made me walk out. Time frame? Harrison asked. 48 hours, I said. Harrison finished typing. He hit print. The wireless printer in the corner whirred to life, spitting out 3 pages of legal destiny. I took the warm papers from the tray. I grabbed a pen. I walked over to the gurney just as the paramedics were strapping Robert in. Wait, I said to the medics. 1 minute. Ma'am, we need to transport, the medic said impatiently. His pressure is dangerous. It will only take 10 seconds, I said. And it might lower his pressure significantly to know he is not going to prison. I looked down at Robert. He was staring up at me, his eyes filled with tears and fear. The oxygen mask covered his mouth, making him look like a trapped insect. Robert, I said. He nodded weakly. You are going to the hospital, I said. You will survive. It is just a panic attack. But when you get out, you have a choice to make. I held up the document. This is a binding agreement, I explained, my voice cutting through Brenda's sobbing. If you sign this, I will forgive the $2 million debt. I will not send the evidence of your forgery to the FBI. You will not go to jail. Robert's eyes widened in hope. He tried to reach for the paper. But, I continued, pulling it back slightly, there are conditions. First, you sign away all rights to me. You are no longer my father in any legal sense. Second, you and your family must vacate the house at 42 Oak Street within 48 hours. What? Brenda screamed from the side. 48 hours? That is impossible. Robert is in the hospital. We have nowhere to go. You can't do this. I turned my gaze to Brenda. It was a cold, flat look that silenced her. You gave me 0 hours. Brenda, I said, you threw my bags on the lawn in the middle of a storm. You didn't care if I had a place to go. You told me to starve in the street. 48 hours is a luxury. 48 hours is mercy. But the house, Brenda stammered. It is our home. It was never your home, I said. It was bought with my mother's blood money. It belongs to the trust now, and I am evicting you. I looked back at Robert. Sign it, Robert, or take your chances with the federal prosecutor. I hear the prison infirmary is not very comfortable. Robert lifted a trembling hand. He didn't look at Brenda. He didn't look at Kyle. He looked at the pen. He knew he was beaten. He knew he had no cards left to play. I placed the clipboard on his chest. He gripped the pen with difficulty. He scrawled his signature on the line. It was a messy, jagged scrawl, but it was legally binding. Harrison, witness it, I commanded. Harrison stepped forward and signed quickly. Done, I said, taking the clipboard back. You are free. Robert, free of the debt, and free of me. I nodded to the paramedics. Take him. As they lifted the gurney to wheel him out, Robert pulled the oxygen mask down. He struggled to turn his head to look at me one last time. Joy, he croaked, his voice a broken whisper. Joy, Dad is sorry. Please, I am your dad. The room went silent. Even Brenda stopped crying to hear my response. Kyle held his breath. I looked at the man who had given me half my DNA and none of my worth. I looked at the man who had chosen a lie over his own child because it was cheaper. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt a profound sense of closure. "Mr. Robert," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You said something very profound on the night of my birthday. You said you don't raise another man's kid." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You were right," I said. "And now, I don't raise strangers." Robert let out a sob that sounded like something inside him had shattered. He let his head fall back onto the pillow, closing his eyes against the reality he had created. The paramedics wheeled him out. The wheels of the gurney squeaked on the marble floor, fading down the hallway. Brenda stood there for a moment, looking at the empty doorway, then at me. She looked like she wanted to scream, to attack me, to beg, but she saw the security guards stepping forward. 48 hours. "Brenda," I said, checking my Patek Philippe watch. "The clock started 2 minutes ago. I suggest you start packing." She let out a strangled noise of rage and defeat, grabbed Kyle by the arm, and dragged him out of the room. Kyle looked back at me once, his eyes full of regret, not for what he had done, but for the fortune he had lost. Then they were gone. The room was quiet again. The only evidence of the storm that had just passed was the discarded backing of the EKG pads on the floor and the faint smell of antiseptic. I walked back to the table and picked up the signed agreement. I ran my thumb over the jagged signature. It was over. The legal ties were severed. The emotional ties had been severed long ago. "Are you all right, Joy?" Harrison asked, closing his laptop. I looked at the screen, where the number $45,800,000 was still glowing. "I am excellent. Harrison," I said. "I believe I just completed the most profitable transaction of my life." "Which one?" he asked. "The house?" "No," I said, tearing the DNA test result into small pieces and dropping them into the wastebasket. "I just sold a $2 million debt for the price of absolute freedom." I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the streets where I used to walk in the rain. "Cancel my meetings for tomorrow," I said. "I have a house to inspect." 48 hours is a strange unit of time. It is long enough for a fever to break, for a flower to bloom, or for a life to completely dismantle itself. Precisely 2 days after Robert signed the agreement in the conference room, I stood on the sidewalk in front of 42 Oak Street. The storm that had raged on my birthday was a distant memory. The sky was a crisp, indifferent blue, and the sun was shining with the kind of cheerful brightness that felt almost insulting given the history of this place. The driveway was empty. The leased Audi that Kyle used to polish with obsessive care was gone, repossessed by the dealership or sold in a panic. I didn't care which. The lawn was littered with the debris of a hasty departure, a broken hanger, a discarded cardboard box, a single, lonely black trash bag that they had forgotten to load. Harrison stood beside me, holding a heavy ring of keys. "The inspection is complete," Harrison said, his voice low. "The property is vacant. They took the furniture, the electronics, and the kitchenware. They left the fixtures and the appliances. As per the agreement, the structural integrity is sound, though the deferred maintenance is significant." He held the keys out to me. "It is yours, Joy." I looked at the silver keys. I remembered the day Robert had changed the locks, the metallic click of the deadbolt that had shut me out. Now, I held the power to open it. I took the keys and walked up the driveway. My footsteps echoed on the concrete. I didn't feel a sense of homecoming. I felt like an archaeologist approaching a tomb. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open. The smell hit me first. It was the smell of stale air, old carpet, and the lingering, sour scent of anxiety. The house was hollow, without the clutter of their lives, without Brenda's tacky floral sofas, without Robert's recliner, without the massive television that was always blaring. The house felt incredibly small. I walked through the living room. There were rectangular indentations in the carpet where the furniture had sat for a decade. The walls were scuffed. The fireplace, where I used to sit and read by the light of the embers to save electricity, was cold and full of ash. I walked into the kitchen. The refrigerator was humming. I opened it. It was empty, except for a half-used jar of mustard and a single, withered apple. They had taken everything. They had stripped the place bare in their desperation, likely hoping to sell whatever they could to survive the first month of their new reality. I climbed the stairs. They creaked under my designer boots, the same sound they had made when I crept up them late at night to avoid waking Robert. I went to the master bedroom. It smelled of Brenda's cheap perfume and Robert's sweat. The closet doors were open, revealing empty racks. Then, I walked down the hall to the attic door. This was the only room I cared about. I opened it and stepped into the cramped, angled space that had been my universe. It was strippingly hot in the summer and freezing in the winter. It was where I had taught myself Python. It was where I had written the code that was now trading billions of dollars on the global market. It was empty. The loose floorboard where I had hidden my laptop was still pried open. A gaping wooden mouth. I stood in the center of the room and closed my eyes. I waited for the ghost to come. I waited for the anger, the sadness, the feeling of being small and unwanted, but nothing came. The room was just a room. It was wood and drywall and dust. The magic wasn't in the walls. It had been in me, and I had taken it with me when I left. I walked back downstairs and out the front door. Harrison was waiting by the curb, where a real estate agent was hammering a sign into the lawn. For sale. "Do you want to keep it as a rental property?" Harrison asked. "The market in this area is recovering. It could generate a steady yield." I looked at the house one last time. I looked at the windows that had been like eyes watching me with judgment for 18 years. "No," I said firmly. "I don't want to own this. I don't want to receive a check from this address. I don't want my name on the deed a second longer than necessary. We will list it below market value for a quick sale," Harrison noted, making a note on his tablet. "The proceeds will go to your trust?" "No," I said. "Open a new account. When the house sells, every penny, from the $350,000 of equity to the last cent of profit, I want it donated." Harrison looked up. "To whom?" "To the North Star Initiative," I said. It was a non-profit organization I had vetted personally. They provide housing, coding classes, and legal support for teenagers who have been kicked out of their homes or aged out of the foster system. I want this house to pay for the freedom of 100 other kids like me. Harrison smiled, a genuine, warm expression. "That is poetic justice, Miss Everline." "It is not justice," I said, turning my back on 42 Oak Street. "It is cleaning the slate." We got into the car and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. The days that followed settled into a rhythm of peace that I had never known existed. Information flows like water. It always finds a way to seep through the cracks, although I had blocked their numbers and severed all contact. I still received updates. Harrison's team kept a passive eye on them, mostly to ensure they didn't violate the restraining order or try to sell their story to a tabloid again. The report I received 2 weeks later was brief, factual, and devastating. Robert and Brenda had lasted exactly 10 days in their new apartment, a cramped, 2-bedroom unit in a decaying complex near the industrial park. Without the glue of a common enemy, me, and without the cushion of my money, their marriage had disintegrated instantly. They blamed each other. Brenda screamed that Robert was a fool for signing the agreement. Robert screamed that Brenda was a liar for faking the DNA test. The toxicity that they had directed at me for years turned inward. They devoured each other. Robert filed for divorce on a Tuesday. He moved into a motel room and took a job as a night shift security guard at a warehouse, ironically, a warehouse owned by one of my shell companies. He spent his nights walking in circles, guarding assets that belonged to the daughter he had discarded. Brenda, stripped of her status and her credit cards, moved back in with her elderly mother in Ohio. She spent her days posting vague, bitter quotes on Facebook about betrayal and ungrateful children. But her audience had moved on, without the drama. She was just another unhappy woman in a small town. And Kyle? The update on Kyle was the most satisfying, in a dark, literary sort of way, with his college scholarship revoked and his gambling debts calling. Kyle had been forced to enter the workforce, but with no degree, no skills, and a reputation for being difficult, his options were limited. Harrison sent me a photo taken by a private investigator. It showed a sanitation truck stopped at a curb in the suburbs, hanging off the back. Wearing a neon yellow vest and heavy gloves was Kyle. He was lifting a heavy, leaking trash bag into the crusher. His face was grim, streaked with grime. I remembered the night of my birthday. I remembered the 3 black trash bags on the lawn. I remembered Kyle laughing as he filmed me. They threw me out like trash. I thought, and now, he picks it up for $12 an hour. The universe, it seemed, had a very specific sense of symmetry. I didn't feel happy seeing him like that. I didn't feel the urge to drive by and honk. I just felt a quiet, settling sensation, like a book being closed. They were characters in a chapter I had finished reading. They didn't matter anymore. I focused on my work. Stratosphere Dynamics was growing. We launched the new algorithm, the one I had refined in the penthouse. It outperformed the market by 12% in the first quarter. My net worth didn't just sit at $45 million. It began to climb toward 50, but the money was becoming abstract. It was just a score in a game I had already won. The real prize was the silence in my apartment when I came home. The real prize was opening my refrigerator and seeing it full of food that I had chosen. The real prize was knowing that no one could ever take my keys away again. One evening, about a month after the showdown, I was sitting on my balcony. It was a perfect Chicago night. The wind off the lake was cool but gentle. The city was a sprawling grid of diamonds below me. Millions of lights representing millions of lives. I was wearing a silk robe, my feet bare on the cold stone. In my hand was a glass of Pinot Noir, a vintage that cost more than Robert used to spend on groceries for a month. I took a sip, letting the complex, earthy notes settle on my tongue. I thought about the girl who had stood in the rain with a backpack and a USB drive. I wanted to reach back through time and hug her. I wanted to tell her that the cold wouldn't last forever. I wanted to tell her that she was right to keep walking. My phone buzzed on the glass table beside me. For a split second, the old reflex kicked in, the tightening of the stomach, the expectation of a demand, an insult, or a crisis. I picked it up. It wasn't a blocked number. It wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't a notification from the bank. It was a text from Elena. Elena was a girl I had met at a coffee shop near my office. She didn't know I was a multimillionaire. She didn't know I owned the building. She just knew I liked obscure sci-fi novels and that I drank my coffee black. Elena: "Hey, a few of us are going to get tacos at that place in Wicker Park. Nothing fancy, just good guac. You in?" I stared at the screen. It was such a simple question. You in? No agenda, no transaction, just a friend wanting my company. I looked at the city below. I could stay here, in my tower, insulated by my millions. I could order a private chef. I could buy the taco restaurant, but that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted the tacos. I wanted the laughter. I wanted the connection that didn't come with a price tag attached to my DNA. I typed back, "Joy. I am in. Send me the location." I set the phone down. I picked up my tablet, which was displaying my live bank balance. The numbers were ticking up. A constant stream of accumulating wealth. $46,102,450. I smiled. It was a beautiful number. It was a shield. It was a sword, but it wasn't me. I pressed the power button. The screen went black. The numbers vanished. I stood up, draining the last of the wine. I felt light. I felt untethered. Money is power. Yes, it gives you the ability to say no. It gives you the ability to walk away. But freedom? Freedom is the moment you stop counting. Freedom is the moment you realize that the people who hurt you don't occupy a single square inch of your mind anymore. I walked back into my living room to get dressed. I chose jeans and a sweater. I didn't need the power suit tonight. I didn't need the armor. As I walked out the door of my penthouse, leaving the lights of the city behind me, I thought of one final thing. They had thrown me out like trash. They had looked at a rough stone and assumed it was worthless because it didn't shine the way they wanted it to. They tossed it into the gutter and laughed. But they forgot the most basic rule of geology. Pressure doesn't destroy a diamond. It creates it. And once that diamond is polished, once it catches the light, it becomes the hardest substance on Earth. They threw me out like trash. But they forgot that a diamond, even in a trash can, is still a diamond. Only now, that diamond was out of their reach forever, shining somewhere they could never afford to go. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Writing Joy's journey from that rainy doorstep to the penthouse has been an incredible ride. And I hope it sparked a fire in you too. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening from a busy subway in New York? A quiet room in London? Or maybe somewhere sunny like Sydney? Drop a comment below with your city and country. Let's see how far Joy's story has traveled. If you enjoyed this tale of revenge and redemption, please subscribe to the Blue Payback channel, smash that like button, and hit the hype button to help push this video out to more people. Your support helps us tell more stories like this. Until next time, remember, know your worth, and never let anyone treat you like anything less than a diamond. Peace.